Hi there, this is Susan Norrell, and I'm going to be talking about solving linear equations and inequalities. We are going to start with equations with two variables. I will start by solving for y and then solve for x, and then I'm going to move to inequalities, solving for one of the two variables. So we'll go ahead and start with problem number 1 here. You'll notice that here in problem number 1, y is already solved for. Now this is the most common form that you will see your equations in the form, written in. These are written in the form y equals mx plus b. When these are written in this form, this is what we call the y-intercept form. This 2, positive 2 because it says plus 2, is your y-intercept. So that means on your y-axis, your line is going to cross at positive 2. So we can go ahead and we can put a point there at positive 2. Your slope, which is the m, is going to be negative 2. Now slope is written as rise. Sorry, I'm writing with a mouse. Be patient with me. Rise over run, which means you're going to go up or down and then right or left. So since this is negative, we're going to come down 2 and to the right 1. Now why 1? Well, because our slope is negative 2. We always put a whole number over 1 because we could say that 1 will go into 2 whole times. So we can always stick a whole number over the number 1. So we have rise over run, down 2 to the right 1 because only our top value here is negative. So the negative means we're going to go down. And the positive means we're going to go right. So I'll come down 2 and to the right 1. And this is why we call this the slope-intercept form of the equation, because it gives you two values in your equation. It gives you the y-intercept and it gives you the slope. And with those two values, you can actually plot the line on your graph. So y equals mx plus b. Now, if we wanted to manipulate this equation, y equals negative 2x plus 2. And we wanted to turn it around and solve for x. I always kind of explain this to high school students as you're not looking for the answer, you're looking for the missing piece of the puzzle, missing piece of the problem, the x value. So think of PEMDAS, order of operations, right? Think of PEMDAS, but think of it backwards. So when you ask a high school student, what do you do when you lose your cell phone? Well, I call it. Okay, it's dead. You can't call it. Well, then I just ask my mom to buy me a new one. Okay, no, it's not going to work. All right, so as adults, I ask you, what do you do when you lose your cell phone? Well, you backtrack, right? You go backwards. If you walked upstairs, you're going to walk downstairs. If you remember seeing it in the car, you're going to go back out to the car and look for it, right? Because you're the one paying the bills, not mom and dad. So you're going to backtrack in PEMDAS. You're going to deal with anything that's being added or subtracted first. So you have two operations going on here. You have x is being multiplied by negative 2, and then a value is being added to it. So you have multiplication and you have addition. But since we are working backwards, we're going to deal with the number that's being added. So not only are we going to backtrack as in working PEMDAS backwards, we're also going to do the opposite operation. The opposite operation of addition is subtraction. Again, like I said, what did you do this morning? You walked downstairs. So if you're looking for your missing cell phone, you're going to have to walk back upstairs. You have to do the opposite action. So the opposite of addition is subtraction. So the opposite of adding 2 would be subtracting 2. But see, you have to keep that equal on both sides. Remember, this is a balanced scale here. So whatever you do over here to the right side of the equal sign, you also have to do over here. So now you have y minus 2, because those aren't like terms. You can't combine those. These are y's, these are 1's, equals negative 2x. Because 2 minus 2 is just 0. Those cancel each other out. So now you have negative 2 times x. Well, the opposite of multiplication is division. So you're going to simply divide both sides by the exact same number that you're multiplying it by. You're multiplying it by a negative 2, so you're going to have to divide both sides by a negative 2. Negative 2 will go into negative 2 one whole time. And 1 times x is just 1x. 1x can be just written as x. So now you have y minus 2 divided by negative 2. Or we could put that negative in the numerator. We could say negative y minus 2 divided by 2. So you can write that a couple of ways. You could leave the negative in the denominator, and so this could be your final answer right here. Or you could move that negative up to the numerator, and this could be your final answer here. Either one of those would be considered equivalent answers. They would be the same value. Both of those would be equal to 1x, just x. All right. Let's try number 2. Let's say we want to solve for y first. That would be easy enough. Let's paste it over here. We'll do it both ways. We'll solve for y first, and then we'll solve for x. So y would be easy because we only have one thing that's happening to y. The only thing happening to y is it's being multiplied by this negative 3. So the only thing we have to do is we have to undo that operation. The opposite of multiplying by negative 3 would be, hopefully you thought about it, would be to divide by the exact same number, negative 3. But considering we're trying to keep a balancing act on both sides of this equal sign, we would also divide the left side by negative 3. So negative 3 would go into negative 3 one whole time, and 1 times y would just be y. So again, you could keep the negative in the denominator, but if you really want to get technical about the proper way to write these fractions, the way that the computer is going to want you to do this is to put that negative sign in the numerator. It's going to want it up there. Negative 2 times x minus 3 over 3. Another way you could do that is you can move the y over to the left side and put your answer over on the right side of the equal sign. And you could make that a negative 2/3, make that a fraction, negative 2/3 times x minus 3. That's another way that you could write your answer. You could put it in fraction form. Either one of these answers would be considered correct. And again, this answer here would be considered equivalent. It would give you the exact same value as either one of these. But if you really want the textbook answer, they won't leave the negative in the denominator. They'll always move it up to the numerator. It'll be equivalent. It'll give you the exact same thing because a positive divided by a negative is a negative. A negative divided by a positive is a negative. So it's still going to give you the exact same answer, but the correct way to write it in simplified form is to move that negative up to the numerator. All right, let's say we want to simplify for x now instead of y. We have a couple of different operations going on here. We have, let's write PEMDAS out. And you'll see why here in just a second. Because normally, I would want you to take care of the subtraction before the multiplication, right? The subtraction here before the multiplication. Except, where do the parentheses fall? See, we can't really take care of this subtraction because this multiplication is in our way. The parentheses in PEMDAS would come first. So when we're working backwards, when we're backtracking, those parentheses are going to have to come last. So the first thing we got to do is we got to undo this multiplication. We're going to undo the multiplication by dividing. Remember, because the opposite of multiplication is division. So the opposite of multiplying by 2 would be to divide both sides by 2. So 2 goes into 2 one whole time, and 1 times, and this is where we come up with our distributive property. 1 times x would give me x, and 1 times negative 3 would give me negative 3. So we're left with that. What's in parentheses? X minus 3 equals negative 3y over 2. We'll leave that negative 3y over 2. Or we could leave that negative 3/2 times y. We could separate that into a fraction times y. But now we can deal with what was inside those parentheses. And what's inside those parentheses is this subtracting of 3. And the opposite of subtracting 3 would be to add 3. So if I add 3 to both sides, negative 3 plus 3 would give me 0. And x plus 0 or x minus 0 is just x. And over here on the right, I can go ahead and split that up into a fraction. Negative 3 over 2 y plus 3. And there's my final answer. Ooh, my little mouse kind of went crazy. So you can solve for y or you can solve for x. If you want to continue solving this one for y and distribute that negative 2/3, you could actually put that into y equals mx plus b form. Y is equal to negative 2/3 times x would give you negative 2/3 x. And then negative 2/3 times negative 3. Let's come out here to the side to do that. Negative 2/3 times negative 3. Well, first of all, we know a negative times a negative is a positive. And we can simplify this a little further by saying that 3 will go into 3 one whole time. So 2 times 1 would just be 2. So there would be your y equals mx plus b form. If you wanted to put it on a graph, we won't worry about that today. So you could distribute that out further if you wanted to. All right. Let's just simplify this one by solving for y. We won't solve for both y and x. We'll just go for one. Let's solve for y. I have two operations. I am multiplying by negative 5, and I am subtracting 20. So let's write out my PEMDAS here. It's my puppy dog. She wants out of the room. Let me pause for a second so I can let her out. So, let's see. I am subtracting 20. And the opposite of subtracting 20 would be to add 20. So I will add 20 to both sides. And notice I'm not going to add 20 to negative 4x because those are not like terms. So negative 20 plus 20 is just 0. So that's negative 5y minus 0 is just negative 5y. And negative 4x plus 20 is on the right. Those are not like terms, so I'm not going to try to combine those. These are x's, these are 1's. You can't combine two different terms. Next one would be multiplication. I'm multiplying by negative 5. Opposite of multiplying by negative 5 would be to divide both sides by negative 5. So if I divide both sides by negative 5, notice I have to multiply the whole right side by negative 5. Not just one of the terms, but both terms. So we'll do that in one step over here. So let me change my color. Negative 5 will go into negative 5. A negative divided by a negative is a positive. and 5 goes into 5 one whole time. So this is just positive 1 times y is just y. And here we'll split it up. Negative 4x over negative 5 plus 20 over negative 5. So we'll split up both terms, and we'll divide on both by negative 5. So my final answer, I have a negative divided by a negative. That's a positive. Your signs are the same. It's just positive. So that's positive 4/5 x. But a positive divided by a negative, my signs are different. It's going to be a negative. And 5 will go into 20 4 whole times. So there is my final equation, solving for y. And just real quick, if you wanted to stick this on a graph, your y-intercept here, notice that's a negative 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Your slope is a positive 4 over a positive 5. Rise over run, meaning you're going to go up 4 because it's positive, and right 5 because it's positive. So up 1, 2, 3, 4, and right 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there would be your line. That's just quick. I know that's not what we're working on today, but I did want to show you that extension. Okay. And that's just because that equation is in y equals mx plus b form, where b is the y-intercept and m is the slope. Okay, let's try solving this one for y, because it's going to be real easy. There's only one thing happening to y. This one is being multiplied by 2. Being multiplied by 2, the opposite of multiplying by 2 is divide by 2. If I do that to both sides, it's going to be real easy over here, because 2 will go into 2 one whole time, and that'll just leave me 1 times y is y, and 2 will go into 12 6 whole times. So that will leave me 6 times x minus 2. Because that's in parentheses, this is 12 times x minus 2 divided by 2. And multiplication and division are on the same level in PEMDAS. So you don't have to do all multiplication before division. So you can go ahead and divide these two numbers before you try to distribute the 12. And I can show you what that looks like if you wanted to distribute first. Let's say we went ahead and distributed first. We did 12 times x was 12x, and 12 times negative 2 was negative 24, and that was 2y. Now, watch what happens over here. When we distribute 6 times x, we get 6x. And 6 times -2 is -12 equals y. And there's our final answer. But watch over here on the right. When we divide both sides by 2, just like we did on the left, remember 2 goes into 2 one time. 1 times y is just y. And when we divide the 12x by 2, and when we divide the -24 by 2, two will go into 12 6 times, so that leaves me 6x. And 2 will go into 24 12 times, so that's 6x minus 12 equals y. So notice I came up with the same answer 2 different ways. I divided first and then distributed, or I distributed first and then divided. Take whichever route makes the most sense to you. There's no one way to solve a math problem. You can do the way that makes the most sense to you. All right. I think this one is a little harder than you'll actually have to deal with. So I'm going to actually skip this one today and move on to something like this one. Notice there's nothing to combine on the left. So here I'm going to distribute the -3 times the 3y and the -3 times the +1. So I'll have 2x plus 15 is equal to -3 times +3y would give me -9y, and -3 times +1 would give me -3. Now, if I want to solve for y, there's being multiplied and being subtracted. So if I look at PEMDAS, the opposite of subtracting is addition. So the opposite of subtracting 3 would be adding 3. So if I add 3 here, I'm going to add 3 here. Notice I'm adding it to the like terms, one on each side of the equal sign. -3 plus 3 is just 0. So I have 2x, and +15 plus 3 is +18, is equal to -9y Now I'm dealing with -9 times y, that's multiplication, in which the opposite is division. So the opposite of multiplying by -9 is to divide by -9. And I have to do that to both sides. So 2x divided by -9, +18 divided by -9 would give me -9 goes into 18. Well, we'll just do that. Positive divided by a negative is a negative. So 18 divided by 9. And negative divided by a negative is a positive. 9 goes into 9 one whole time, and 1 times y is just y. So here's where we've got a positive divided by a negative is going to be a negative. I'm going to put the negative sign in the numerator. 2/9 x minus 9 goes into 18 2 whole times equals y. It really doesn't matter if you put y equals y or y equals on the left or the right. Both are equivalent equations. Both would be acceptable answers. All right, let's go ahead and jump over to inequalities. Solving inequalities are going to have almost the exact same rules to solving equations, with one exception. You'll notice that when we divide by negatives, it doesn't really affect the equal sign. But negative means opposite of. So when you divide an inequality sign, you're saying opposite of. So when you multiply or divide an inequality by a negative, you actually have to flip your sign around. So let's look at number 1, and I'll show you what I mean. So here's a prime example of what I'm talking about. We're going to solve this the exact same way, PEMDAS. And this is being multiplied, x is being multiplied by -4. So the opposite of multiplying by -4 is to divide by -4. And I have to do that to both sides. But when you multiply an inequality or divide an inequality by a negative number, here's the catcher, you actually have to do the opposite of that inequality sign, because you're saying the opposite of, and the opposite of less than is greater than. So negative divided by negative is positive, and 4 goes into 4 one time. 1 times x is x. And the opposite of less than is greater than. A positive divided by a negative is a negative. And 4 goes into 8 2 whole times. So in this case, we're saying that x is greater than -2. So that's the only difference in solving inequalities versus equations, is when you multiply or divide by a negative number, you actually have to flip that inequality sign around. Not add or subtract, just multiply or divide. So let's look at number 2 here. Solving for x, the opposite of multiplying by +3. I'm not multiplying by a negative number this time. I'm multiplying by a positive number, so I'm not actually going to flip that sign around. 3 will go into 3 one whole time. 1 times x is x, is going to be less than or equal to -7/3. Okay, remember what I said, you don't have to flip it around if it's addition or subtraction, just multiplication or division. The opposite of subtracting 3 would be to add 3 to both sides. -3 plus 3 would give me 0. and m minus 0 is just m, is less than negative 7 plus 3. Think about it. If you're 7 feet below the water and you go up 3, now you're only 4 feet below the water. Negative 4. Another way to do this is if your signs are different, subtract the numbers. 7 minus 3 is 4, and keep the sign of the bigger number. The bigger number is negative, so that would be negative 4. M would be less than negative 4. Okay, now we're getting to a few more operations. So let's write out our PEMDAS. Now, I don't actually see any parentheses here, but if there is operation in the numerator, then there's like an invisible set of parentheses here. So I've got parentheses and then divided by negative 4. So notice parentheses are actually going to come last. I'm going to deal with what's being divided first, which means I'm going to have to multiply by the same exact thing. So the opposite of dividing by negative 4 would be to multiply both sides by negative 4. So a negative divided by a negative is a positive, and 4 will go into 4 one whole time. 1 times n plus 1 would just be n plus 1. Now, remember what I said. If you multiply or divide by a negative, you got to flip this sign around. So it's no longer going to be greater than or equal to. It's going to be less than or equal to. And 8 times negative 4 will be negative 32. Because my signs are different. So answer's negative. Now the opposite of addition is subtraction. So the opposite of adding 1 would be to subtract 1 from both sides. Positive 1 minus 1 is 0. So n is less than or equal to negative 32 minus 1. Think about it. If I am 32 feet below the water level and I go down another foot, now I'm 33 feet below the water level. I'm negative 33 feet. Signs are the same, so add the numbers and keep the sign. N would be less than or equal to negative 33. Okay, this would be an instance in where you would want to distribute first, or you don't have to. You can get rid of the 7. You could actually solve this 2 ways. You've got PEMDAS. Let's think of it as doing what's in parentheses last. So dealing with the multiplying by 7 first, which would be dividing by 7, doing the opposite. So if I divide both sides by 7, positive 7, because it's positive, 7 will go into 7 one whole time, and 1 times u plus 8 is just u plus 8. Is greater than or equal to, a negative divided by a positive is a negative. 7 goes into 35 5 times. Now I can deal with what's being added by subtracting the exact same thing. The opposite of adding 8 is subtracting 8 from both sides. Positive 8 minus 8 is 0, leaving me u is greater than or equal to negative 5 minus 8. Think about it. I'm 5 feet below the water level, and I go down 8 more feet. Now I'm 13 feet below the water level. U is greater than or equal to negative 13. Now let's come back and distribute first. 7 times u is 7u. 7 times positive 8 is positive 56. And that's greater than or equal to negative 35. Now we can see that we would deal with addition, the adding 56 by subtracting 56 from both sides. (56 minus 56 is 0, leaving me 7u is greater than or equal to negative 35 minus 56. I'm going to need my calculator. You can't use this kind of calculator, but you can use your own. Negative 35 minus 56. It's negative 91. Okay. And then we deal with what's being multiplied by 7 by dividing by 7. Seven will go into 7 one time, leaving me u is greater than or equal to negative 91 divided by 7, negative 13. U is greater than or equal to negative 13. So you can see two different ways to approach that problem. I thought this way on the left here was much easier. All right, what happens if we have a variable on both sides? Move it. I notice that this p is negative and this p is negative, but this p is larger. So if I move the larger negative one over here to the right, it should make it positive. This is a negative 2p, so if I add 2p to both sides, see, I'm not dividing by 2p because I'm not trying to separate the 2 from the p. I'm just trying to move the p's all to one side. That would give me 4 is less than or equal to 7. And then negative 1p plus 2p would give me positive 1p. So I moved my p's to the right. I'll move my numbers to the left. This is a positive 7, so I'll subtract 7 from both sides. Seven minus 7 is 0, leaving me 0 plus p is just p. 4 minus 7 is negative 3. So I have negative 3 is less than p, or you could say p is greater than negative 3. Notice how in either one of these answers, the big alligator mouth here is open to the p. So if you're nervous about flip-flopping which side your variable goes on, just keep your big mouth open to the variable there. This one's going to require some distribution and then moving it. So distribute your 4, distribute your 2, and then try moving it like we did in the last example. Pause the video and see how you do. Okay, 4 times 1 will give me 4. 4 times negative r would give me negative 4r. And that would be greater than, because I haven't multiplied or divided by a negative. 2 times r would give me 2r. 2 times positive 3 would give me positive 6. Now again, you'll notice that I have r's on both sides, and I got numbers on both sides. So I'm going to move my r's one way and my numbers the opposite way. Since I have a positive r here, I'm going to go ahead and move the negative r this way. But I'm not trying to separate the 4 from the r, so I'm not dividing it. I'm going to move the whole thing over there. So since it's subtracting 4r, I'm going to add 4r to both sides. That way I get negative 4r plus 4r is just 0. And I'm left with 4 minus 0 is just 4. 2r plus 4r is 6r plus 6. Now I went to all the trouble to move my r's to the right side, so I'm going to go and move my numbers to the left side. So where they're adding 6, I'll subtract 6 from both sides. 6 minus 6 is 0. So that leaves me 6r minus 0, or plus 0 is just 6r. And 4 minus 6 is negative 2. Now we can get to separating that 6 from the r. The opposite of multiplying by 6 would be to divide by 6. And I do that to both sides. So that 6 goes into 6 one time. 1 times r is just r. Notice I'm not flipping that sign around because I didn't divide by a negative 6. I just divided by a positive 6. A negative divided by a positive is a negative, and I can simplify this. If I divide both of these values by 2, 2 will go into 2 one time, and 2 will go into 6 3 times. So I simplified my fraction. So we could say that negative 1/3 is greater than r, or we could say that r is less than negative 1/3. Either way, notice that the point is pointed to the r. The point is pointed to the r. The big mouth is open to the negative 1/3 in both of these answer choices. And I think that one's pretty easy compared to what you've been doing. So I will put these resources into the course content. And if you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to reach out and let me know. Have a great day.